All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 11th annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Machik with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I am moderating today's opening session, and assisting me today is the fabulous Leah Langby with the IFLIS Library System, and we're so glad you are here. Our opening session presenter is Rebecca Smith-Aldrich, and she works for the Mid-Hudson Library System based out of New York. And some of you might remember that Rebecca spoke for us for this conference in 2017. So that was 6 years ago, and was very well received. People are still talking about that session. So we brought her back and are very excited. So Rebecca, please begin whenever you're ready.
All right, awesome. Jamie, thanks so much for having me. And Lee, it's lovely to be on the screen with you again. I am thrilled to be at this conference. I had such a good time in 2017 because Jamie is so well organized, as you folks all really well know. And Jamie asked me to come in today and kick off your conference and kind of acknowledge the reality of where we are today in the world and the profession, and share a little of the thinking that we've been doing, not only through the Mid-Hudson Library System, but in a larger project I'm involved with called the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. So today we're going to take a look back, have a little reality check, and then take a look forward. You guys were positing where you might want to be 5 years from now. Kudos to those of you that are retiring, but you've got some time, right, between now and then. And how are you going to spend that time? So as we think about the fact that the future is unwritten, how do we own that and step into that moment in a way that's fair to us, fair to those that we serve, and that leaves a legacy that we can all be proud of? So I want to start by taking a look back, and I promise not to be too maudlin about this, but I think it's important to set the stage so we all acknowledge why we might be feeling the way we are today, right? I wanted to share this photo. This was the day we closed the offices of the Mid-Hudson Library System in Poughkeepsie, New York, when the governor sent the stay-at-home order. So I'm taking us back, right, to that moment when it really kind of came home to roost. The pandemic was here and what that might actually mean for us. And I remember like saying bye to my folks, and just kind of stunned that the doors of 70 of my buildings were closed and over 1,000 of my staff got sent home. And I drove out kind of in shock, and I saw this sign about 2 blocks from my office. And of course, it was so heartwarming. I'm like, oh, how lovely. Yes, of course, we're all in this together. Be kind, be safe, people. And I'll see you in about 2 weeks, right? I had no idea what was about to come. And I have to say, I think personally, I was kind of in shock. I don't know about you folks, as it kind of sunk in what was going on and the weight of what was happening. And I kind of defaulted to some very unhealthy self-care opportunities for myself. I baked a lot of brownies. I ate a lot of brownies on a schedule that was way too fast for my diet. I think I needed like an intervention for brownie consumption about a month into the pandemic. But I think it was just a symptom of just the kind of unrealness of the moment. I felt kind of trapped in my house, and I was trying to help my libraries, and my days became just very, very strange. It was a new thing every day that the government was giving us new instructions for libraries and what we could and couldn't do. And here in New York, we were absolutely glued to the screen every day at noon when our now disgraced governor would come on and help us through each day, to the point where he had to remind us what day of the week it was. That's how kind of weird things were at that time. I'll also share that I learned, because my timing in my neighborhood to go grocery shopping was at 7 a.m. Can't buy beer in New York before 8 o'clock, which was a real blow at that moment, which is something that I had to address as well later on in the pandemic. But, what became apparent super quick, right, to all of us was that this was not just a 2-week stay-at-home kind of wandering around. This was something that was going to require us all to pull together and flatten the curve as we saw what the pandemic was really starting to look like and the impacts of it in some of the larger cities in our area. Here in New York, you were watching first responders and the hospital staff workers really struggling through the first month of the pandemic, and recognizing that if we didn't all pull together, we were going to have a very large disaster on our hands, larger than the disaster we already had. And so something I always turn to, and this is a New Yorker thing maybe, but after 9/11 here in New York, this quote was what kind of brought my sanity to me, and it helped me with the pandemic as well, was to take that deep breath and look around and remind myself this is not all falling apart. There's tons of people pulling together to help, right? So if anyone's a fan of Mr. Rogers, I know I am. And this quote certainly makes the rounds on social media every now and again, so you might have seen it before. But the idea of looking for the helpers, right? And seeing that human spirit rise up in the face of challenges and disasters and the aftermath of disasters, and how we pull together regardless of perhaps our standing in the world, our educational background, our political views, and we just help one another. And it always says to me, like, I wish the world was like this every day, right? That we just got over our stuff and we made things work for each other and we were kind and nice to each other. But we know that's not the way it is every day. But where I found my thread of sanity and what kind of pulled me out of the brownie, like, spin I was in at that point, was watching my libraries and what they were pulling off in these moments. So within a month, right, we had to figure out, how do you provide library services in this environment? And we saw awesome things happening, from traditional library services like maybe story hour online or answering questions to help people connect with services. We saw libraries in our program. This is on the left here, one of my library system colleagues, that every library that had a 3D printer, they pulled them into one room and they started printing face shields for healthcare workers. Because if you remember, we had that shortage of PPE at even hospitals at that point, to dealing with more extreme things like food scarcity issues. This is a picture on the right of one of my libraries that converted their staff room, staff refrigerator into a fresh food pickup point because people were just cut off from the school lunch program, from other government sponsored programs that help them bridge the gap in lean times budget wise. And we saw libraries just get so creative so fast. Top of the screen, right? You're all checking out my storybook characters. That's from the Catskill Library. And those folks showed up and just hung out in the parking lot, waving to kids who would drive by at the time they normally would have come to the library for a story hour, just to see their people again, right? And it's what really helped me kind of gather myself and get focused and really, rise to that moment and think, how do we help in the face of what's going on here? Despite the fact this is extremely disruptive, we're super concerned about ourselves, our families, our friends, our neighbors, but we also know if we don't pull together, this isn't going to work out very well for even more people. And so we kind of like got the hang of it, right? And like we were figuring it out, but then like the hits just kept coming. And it was just one thing after another. Some bizarre stuff happened during that time period. And I just remember this very clear moment. The murder hornet headline. I just remember laughing manically, like, sure, why not? What else is going to happen this year, right? But it just reminded me that there's always going to be change. There's always going to be disruption. We just weren't used to the pace at which it was coming at us, right? And it just didn't stop. And sometimes we feel like maybe it hasn't slowed down as much as we wished it would at this point. So there was this constant feeling of like, what's going to happen today? What's going to be the next headline? And stuff got very, very serious mid-year, right? We had the racial reckoning in our country of understanding that more people were rising up and asking for racial justice in our communities, which led to a much broader conversation in our profession about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and a lot of education in our work about this, which we are still contending with today as we look at the division in some of our communities about what books are on our shelves and what programs we're offering. And we find ourselves really sitting in this spot we never expected ourselves to be, which is the targets of folks' ire about some of the choices we make in our collections. We're contending with the record-setting book challenges. We're seeing the need to defend people's right to read and to really help families understand what kids have access to and what's appropriate for them and where we locate things in the library, and being questioned about some of our professional ethics, which is super uncomfortable. So as we look at what books are being banned, we also see this wider systemic issue in our society that certainly was brought to bear in the middle of 2020. And we're seeing it play out in a lot of different ways in our country. But libraries find themselves on the front line of some really challenging conversations in some communities, not all, but some. So I hope you saw that Library Journal named the Brooklyn Public Library staff the Librarians of the Year for their work to help break down barriers, to get people access to some of the titles that might be difficult to get their hands on in school libraries and other places. And we see in Chicago also librarians celebrated for their work to defend the right to read in a moment where it's really challenging to stand up sometimes for what we believe in and what our values are. And so I hear from trustees all the time, well, you guys are amazing. You're superheroes. You guys are so amazing. For the past 3 years, you've done so much amazing things. And we're like, yes, we have. But you know what? We're tired. We're really tired. It's been 3 years of intense change, of challenges, of defending our values, of fighting for money for our libraries. And certainly we've always done those things, but not at the intensity that we've had to do in the past 3 years. And so the fact that many of you answered retirement when Jamie asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years, is not surprising to me. Maybe you never thought about retirement too much until the last 3 years, and then you started counting the days. So when am I out of here, right? But while we're in these moments, we have to decide what we're going to do and how we're going to behave and what our legacy is going to be in these places we are. So I was really caught by an editorial in the Times this weekend by Roxane Gay. I don't know if anyone else is a big friend of her work friend column. But this line just really struck me, that we're not cogs in a machine. We're not caught and trapped in these unfortunate circumstances in the wider world around us, right? We have agency. We are empowered to make different choices, do different things, spend our time and energy wisely based on what not only is best for us, but our families and our neighbors. So this is where I want to spend our time together this morning, is thinking about the fact that libraries work because we do, because we are healthy and we understand our capacity and what we're able to do, and we're realistic about that. And they also work because we work in a way that makes sure that our libraries are relevant and responsive to the people that we serve. So as we think about how we're going to do that and what is this future we're going to be writing for ourselves, I just want to ask you to do me a favor. I want you to just pause for a sec and remember why you got into this whole thing. Why did you answer that job ad? Or why did you go to school for library science? Or why are you passionate about the people that you serve and the work that you do? And just hold that in your heart for me while we go through this morning, because I think if that is at the center of our hearts, it helps us get through some of those more challenging times. But we can't get through those more challenging times if we're not super honest about how we are doing as individuals. And so the whole movement of self-care, of understanding our limitations and being kind to ourselves. You're going to hear me use this phrase over and over again, from the inside out. And normally I'm talking about our institutions, our libraries, but I'm truly talking about you as a person, your team that you help work with every day, maybe your entire institution, depending on what your responsibility is in the library. But if you don't take care of yourself, none of the rest of it works. And so a lot of time when I'm helping library directors in my own system, we have 66 libraries. We've had an amazing amount of turnover of a lot of positions, not only directorships, but other positions in our libraries. And the more I talk to people, the more I hear it's not necessarily the institution that's the problem. It's just we're tired, we're burnt out, we need something different, I've got to recalibrate. And so that kind of self-awareness that we need to have of how are we doing as individuals, and shutting off the noise in the wider world around us and really checking in with ourselves is the starting spot. So not only remembering what motivates us, but how are we doing? Are we treating ourselves kindly in the work that we do? Because if you can't continue on, you're not doing anyone any good. And the most important thing is your health and your mental health. So I want to just put that out there before we start talking about some of the learnings we've had through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative and all the cool stuff that's happening. Because if you're tired, if you're just like, I need a break, you're not going to really want to hear anything I have to say here this morning. I'm guessing that's not the case because you opted into this conference and you're interested to hear what's going on in other places and learn from your peers throughout the state and the country. So I just want to say that maybe you've mastered this, maybe you're awesome at self-care, that's great. I want to share a new resource with you that we're introducing in my system this year. It's called Healthy Minds at Work, because we find that staff are really passionate about what they do and they're showing up every day. And sometimes the entire institution needs a little help in changing the culture of the workplace to make sure that we're really focused on humans, both library workers and the people who are coming through our door. So this is a free resource if you're interested in this kind of thing. It's an app, it's free. It's based on scientific research about how to create a healthy workplace culture and making sure we're focused on the well-being of our employees. So it focuses on 4 elements of well-being in the workplace, which are itemized here for you, which is awareness and being present in your interactions with people, being connected with folks and practicing kindness and gratitude, which of course we hope is reciprocated. So we're trying to lead by example, and getting curious about motivations and what your expectations are about the workplace and what your beliefs are, and making sure they're in alignment with other people, because that can often be a source of friction. And then purpose, how do you stay motivated in the work, whether you've been there a long time or you maybe just stepped into libraries during this insane time of disruption. I think that's what I'm always really focused on, is purpose in the work that we do, and making sure what we do is meaningful and makes a difference in people's lives. And that really is the bulk of what I want to talk to you about here today, is work with meaning. Things that we do, maybe we need to question, maybe we need to take a look at, does it actually meet the needs of our community? Are we actually doing things that contribute to a more healthy local and global community that we are all inhabiting? And so that's where I'm going to center the rest of my time with you here this morning, which is to acknowledge the fact, and I hope you guys got my reference, maybe you're a fan of The Clash or Joe Strummer, that was the name of his autobiography, The Future is Unwritten, but it is true that the future is unwritten. We can influence what happens next, as long as we own the fact that we have our own sphere of influence. We can't fix every problem across the world, but we can do things in our own sphere of influence. So what story is your library going to write? What goals are you going to focus on? What's important to this institution? What does your community value, and how are you reflecting that back to them in the services and programs that you're choosing? So as you think about that, it's going to look a little different from community to community. I'm not here to tell you there's a one-size-fits-all approach for how to do whatever you do next, because I bet you're already doing a lot of fabulous things. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about here today, is that I'm not just talking about new things. I'm talking about looking about what you already do through a lens that speaks to the wider world around us, and to talk about what we do through that lens in a way that connects more broadly with people who are making decisions about our funding, about policies that influence us, and about overall goodwill in the community towards our organizations. Because every little decision we make does tell a story about who we are, right down to the office paper we buy, and right up to what kind of buildings we buy, and also what kind of programs and services we design for the communities that we serve. So those are big, big things, right? And so I always joke that I like to start big, and we can't get bigger than the planet Earth. And so as you start to think about your role, wherever you're sitting in Wisconsin, whatever your job is at your library, whatever responsibilities are in your job description, you're part of this much larger world, right? Like everything's connected, and the choices we make locally have global impacts. And we just got a really tough lesson in that, thanks to the pandemic, right? We saw very quickly how decisions made by individuals could influence a school, a community, a whole state, if not a whole country, in terms of the spread of the virus. And so it was an unfortunately good lesson in how to work together, to work on a much bigger issue than we are normally working on together. And unfortunately, that was kind of a crash course for working on even larger systemic issues like climate change and social justice issues throughout our country. So in our world, we work on and I say our world, I'm talking about the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, but this is a group of individuals here in New York who started out about 7 years ago, recognizing that climate change was a major impact on our communities and was just going to get worse, and really kind of fearful that there was no guidance coming from anywhere about what libraries should be doing in the face of climate change and the impacts of it. So as we started to learn, okay, well, what kind of impact can we have locally on this very large global topic? The best thing we learned very early on is that it's all about local. It's starting from where you are and understanding who lives in your community, what challenges folks are facing, what is the geography that you live in, how will that react in the face of climate change and the impact it's going to have, and to really focus local. And I think that's such a freeing thing, because as you read the headlines across the country and the globe, they're overwhelming. They can sometimes make you feel paralyzed in the face of it. Well, I can't do anything about that. But the truth is, every interaction we have, every choice we have can possibly lead to this decision tree that results in a better world for people. And it's kind of interesting to think about the world in that way. It also could be overwhelming and, again, paralyzing. So the work that we've been doing at the Sustainable Libraries Initiative is how does we make this, more approachable, more bite-sized, and help people be excited and engaged about work we do in these areas, and not feeling like it's just hopeless and that we can't get anywhere on it. So I wanted to start in this section by telling you a little story about one of my libraries. And I hope you don't mind the language I'm about to use. And it was out of the mouths of a teenager, so I'm sure that will surprise nobody. But this is the Pauling Library. Two of the young women right in the middle are the two young ladies with the long hair and the matching sweatshirts, of course. walked into the library one day and they asked if they could book basically the meeting space at the library. And the librarian asked, well, how old are you? And they said 16. And they said, oh, well, currently the policy says you have to be 18 to use this meeting space, but may I ask why you want to use it? And their answer was they wanted to make the world suck less. And the librarian said, cool, that's what we do here. Let me talk to my director. And this awesome story unfolded where the director said, cool, that's what we do here. That's right. So why don't we think about this? And they ended up letting the kids, with some oversight, use the meeting space, and they got to design their own program, which was to invite their peers from the school and the community to come and help them think about this. How do we make the world suck less? And the library reassigned all the money for teen programming in the library over to the kids. So the kids decided how to spend the money and what to do for the year. So they picked service programs and service activities in the community. You see here them gathered around a table because they just made blankets for the homeless shelter. They also used the library's digital lab to create ads for the animal shelter for pets that needed to be adopted. They created superhero kits for kids that were living in the domestic violence shelter. And the kids were the ones who envisioned, what does it look like to make the world a better place in our corner of the world? And I just always remember that moment where the youth librarian told me, and I said, cool, that's what we do here. And it just always brings it back to me, like why we do what we do, right? Sometimes we get lost in the minutia of the stuff we do, and we need to take that step back and remind ourselves why we do what we do and how we can help empower people to go further and do better in our communities. And so I absolutely love this story because it echoes what we're hearing from a very large global community of climate scientists who are trying to help everyone in this world prepare for climate change and respond to what climate change is doing to our world. I'm not going to bore you with the details of this report. It goes back to 2014 from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That's what the IPCC logo is in the lower right there. But they talked about some of the key strategies that we need to deploy to be successful as a society in the face of climate change. And in my first book, Sustainable Thinking, I boiled this down to make it more relatable to what libraries do. But at the end of the day, there's 4 key strategies to be focused on, which is A, to focus locally, to make sure we understand what our community is dealing with, to help people work together to problem solve. And that means really recognizing and valuing diversity and promoting people's empathy, respect, and understanding for one another, and helping all be heard. We know as library workers, there are folks whose voices do not get heard in policymaking, in the publishing world, in many of the ways that we try to convey information, education, entertainment through our collections. We have to work extra hard to make sure marginalized voices get heard. And the same thing has to happen in our communities. So this list might surprise you, right? It's not about building seawalls and carbon extraction technology in our communities. Of course, those things are going to be necessary to lessen the impacts of climate change, but it's really a people problem, right? As we think about behavior and working together. And so how do libraries help contribute to that is something that I think is really meaningful and gives purpose to our work in the future. Because I think what people really need today is hope. Right? You're bombarded by media about what's bad about the world and what's not going well. And people are angry with each other because they think their worldviews are different. But I'll tell you, in my 20 years of working with libraries, not only in my own region, but across the country, I have run more focus groups than I can count with people who live in our communities, and they are not that different from one another. What they truly want are safe places to raise their kids, healthy communities where they can feel like people respect each other. They want to be engaged with their neighbors, and libraries can be there to create that kind of catalyst for some of those good things to be happening. So we've always kind of been, I think, beacons of hope in our communities, but the younger generation coming up is helping us understand that hope is not enough. Right? I hope you recognize this young woman, Greta Thunberg, who is probably the most well-known climate activist in the world right now. And she's famous for speaking truth to power at the Davos Economic Forum, which is where very wealthy people who have a lot of control over our world and our economic system make decisions that affect many other people who are kind of powerless in some of those decision structures. She spoke up and said, this is not just about your hope and your talking points. We need you to act. And she used this great euphemism. I want you to act if your house is on fire, because it already is. And she's, of course, talking about climate change and its arrival and its being here and its impact on people. But we can see across our country a lot of different things. It's already kind of on fire. We need to work together and do a better job. So right before the pandemic in 2019, a colleague of mine introduced this word to me I had never heard before. I want to share it with you. It's hope punk, and it's from a YA author, Alexander Rowland. And they describe it as weaponized optimism. And when I read the definition of this, I'm like, oh, that's library people. Because what it's talking about is, believing, having beliefs, having values, and then standing up for them, and really sometimes having to fight for them, as we're seeing with the book challenges across our profession. But to truly focus on being part of building a braver, kinder world and working together to do that. And not just hoping it happens or not just talking about it happening, but actually doing something about it. And that's what I'm really excited about in the work that I see happening in our profession right now, because I'm seeing more of this, more deliberate choices that we're making. We're not just kind of leaving things to chance. We're starting to pull in the same direction on some really key things. If you're not familiar with the Center for the Future of Libraries, I just wanted to put this before you. This is an organization that's within the American Library Association that thinks about the future and how libraries can be successful in the future. And what are some of the things we have to keep our eye on to be successful in the future by learning from other industries. And my favorite little bubble in their trend collection is this collective impact idea, because I like to make a difference. And I think you do too, or you probably wouldn't have chosen this profession. You want to help people at the end of the day. And given the large problems, the systemic nature of the problems that we are faced with, more people focused on the right things will have a bigger impact. And that's really called for today because of the scale and scope of some of the things that we're dealing with. And I'll just use climate change as an example. Climate change is predicted to negatively impact every child alive today. It has been called a code red for humanity by the UN Secretary of General. There is no grander challenge to our generation than climate change. And so having more people thinking about that, organizing around that, and making better decisions in that space is how we're truly going to make a difference in the lives of the next generation who are being impacted by the decisions of our generation. So as you kind of look around you, if you're feeling like this makes sense to you and you're like, I wonder who else in my vicinity thinks the same thing, this is where it gets exciting, when you find like-minded people who want to work on these things too. So I have another little anecdote I wanted to share with you, and then I'm going to get into very practical examples so you can kind of see how some libraries are rising to these challenges and what they're doing about it. But right after I spoke actually at the Wisconsin, this conference in 2017, maybe a year and a half later, I was speaking at the New York Library Association conference, my own home state conference. And I don't know about if you remember going to in-person conferences, they're kind of exhausting, right? Like you're running around, you're finding things, you're talking to people. I'm introverted, so it's very, very hard for me. I get very tired. And a fun fact about me is that I swear when I get tired. And I was talking, I know Jamie's getting very nervous now as I said that, so I was talking to a bunch of youth services librarians, talking about climate change and the younger generation and inviting them to be a part of what we do next. And people were getting really excited, asking great questions and, saying, oh, well, I could do this with the summer reading program theme. And oh, I could do a book display about this. And oh, I've got a team group, and you could just feel the energy rising. And without thinking, pops out of my mouth, that's right, folks, we're going to library science the shit out of this. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'm going to say, I'm so sorry to you here today for saying that. And people laughed and I moved on. But someone in the audience, as a gag, made a tote bag for me with a quote on it. And I thought, oh, very funny. And a month later, I'm at JFK Airport, one of the busiest airports in the country, and I'm waiting for my flight to North Carolina to see my in-laws. And someone walked by me with the bag. And I didn't know that person. And I called my friend who made the tote bag and I said, what just happened? And she's like, oh, we opened an Etsy shop. We thought it would be funny. And the next thing I knew, most of the people I knew in New York had bought the t-shirt or the bag. Now, I'm sharing this with you because it's a funny story, but also the people on this slide, which are only a fraction of those who bought this darn thing, are now part of this wider network of folks that are working on the Sustainable Libraries Initiative with us and thinking about how do we make this world a better place using the platform of libraries and the things that we are really good at, our programs, our collections, our customer service, our partnerships, the trust equity we have in our communities. How do we marshal that to make a difference and not just leave it to chance? And so that's what we've been working on for the past 7 years through the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. A group of volunteers, just like yourself, we just got together and we said, what could help us do this work? Maybe we don't have all the answers, but man, let's make progress on this. It's not going to be perfect. Sometimes it's not going to be pretty, but at least we're going to go in the right direction and we'll learn along the way. And so I invite you to join us. We've got a number of free resources here for you. On the left, you see the roadmap to sustainability. You can download it as a mobile app on iOS or Android, and it helps you kind of think through some of these bigger ideas and start to recognize we do a lot of stuff already that speaks to this. We just might not be talking about it in a way that more people are connecting with. Or you might learn, oh, we might want to address this because I see this as a challenge in my community. We also developed a methodology to help folks really think through library operations, program and service design, how we manage this building, what partnerships we seek out, how do we actually make sure we have a firm financial picture for the future. And that's called the Sustainable Library Certification Program, which was the first United States program recognized by the International Federation of Library Associations through their Green Libraries program. So, that was kind of cool going to Greece to pick up the award in Athens, Greece. But the key to this, all of this work, is this idea we call the triple bottom line, which is borrowed from an economist, John Elkington. And the point is to make better decisions moving forward, right? You make decisions every day in the workplace about what to buy, what to do, who to work with. And so given the enormity of climate change and social disruption that we're seeing through issues related to social justice and inequities in our society, as well as just the truth bomb that libraries don't have enough money to do what we need to do, right? We've got to balance all of these competing sometimes things in a way that's doable for us moving forward. So we use this model, and it might look familiar to you because it is the same model the American Library Association adopted in 2019 when they made sustainability a core value of the profession. This is the same definition they're using, and they may or may not have gotten it from the work we've done here in New York. So the idea is to find balance in the decisions that you're making. Can you just make better decisions moving forward than you did last year? When you think about what you're buying as a program supply to do craft programs with kids, or maybe you have the opportunity to renovate your library building or your space in the library facility, can you make better decisions about the resources that are used to create the furniture, or maybe pick less toxic carpeting? I don't know. There's all sorts of decisions we make every day that if we could just balance them a little more and think about the wider world around us and the health of the people that are impacted by the decisions that we make, we can live our values out loud with more authenticity. So we use this phrase, sustainable libraries, and we've defined 4 characteristics of sustainable libraries. So you see them here, and I'm going to go through them kind of quick because I think you're probably more interested in our examples from our libraries in the program. But this really means, again, from the inside out, our organizations are strong and authentic. We make good decisions with taxpayer money. We treat our library workers well. We make good decisions about facilities that mean a healthy environment for library workers and the patrons that come in them. And then our services, our programs, our collections that we develop really speak to social cohesion and civic participation, that we want people to understand the wider world around them. We want people to have empathy and respect and understanding for all people in our communities. And we want people engaged in community life so that we are hearing more voices and more people are participating in our democracy. And then very deliberately choosing to work on climate change, that we want to lower our greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to help people be ready in the face of what's coming. Because as we can see from the headlines just this month out in California, climate change is here and it is not going to be ignored. I don't know about you, but I didn't learn that phrase atmospheric river until just last year, and it's going to be something that's here with us for a very long time. The very blunt truth about climate change and the effects that we're seeing already, the record-setting years for heat and severe storms and rain. This is just the beginning, folks. Unfortunately, even if we did everything right on the climate mitigation side of this work, we're still going to see increasingly bad weather for at least the next 30 years. So that's just reality. I'm not saying that to bum you out. I'm just saying that we've got to be prepared. We've got to help people understand the effects in your geography. What is that going to mean? Is it going to mean more snow? Is it going to mean maybe effects on your electrical grid? Should you expect more extended power outages or challenges getting around in your geography? How do we help people prepare for that? These are known issues, right? And we can help more people get ready for that, as well as making sure our own institutions are ready in the face of what's going on. So I just want to share this one little thing, then we'll get into the examples. This is Lisa Kropp. She's on our board of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, and her name might be familiar to you because she's the chair of the National Sustainability Roundtable at the American Library Association. And back here at home, she just got elected as the New York Library Association president. But she noted the work that she was doing through the program, the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, actually helped her library be more prepared in the face of the pandemic. And I don't know anyone else who said they were prepared in the face of the pandemic in the library world. We were all kind of like, what the heck is this, right? But her staff had been thinking about the fact that the disruption from climate change was going to mean more community cooperation, the library positioning itself as a good partner. And that translated really well, actually, in the pandemic when it hit. So I want to share some examples with you, and then we've got plenty of time for questions. I saw some hands go up earlier. I want to make sure you're heard, whether it's a comment or a question, before we leave here today. So I talked about from the inside out, and that means treating our library workers with respect and making sure they're actually paid a living wage. So that's one example of one of the activities in the certification program, is to address policies, budgeting, facility issues, and that starts at home, because we can't be out there talking about good things for the community if we're ignoring how we're actually behaving as an institution. Now, some of you have maybe more say over your budget than others, but you do have to create benchmarks for yourself to plan towards. And if you're not already paying a living wage, maybe you're just at minimum wage for some of your entry-level workers, I encourage you to think of this new benchmark of a living wage. Living wage takes into account the realities of living in the particular community that your library is located in. It doesn't take a national figure or a statewide figure. It actually takes into consideration the taxes you actually pay in your area and what it costs to live in your area, and making sure our budgets reflect that so you can retain and attract quality staff. We all know how hard it is when you lose a great person. To onboard them, it takes a lot of time, energy, and money. So let's keep the great folks we're able to attract by compensating them fairly. So of course, there's tons of other policy things that you can consider, from how you are actually planning financially in your library, to having sustainability as part of your decision-making structure, to how you make purchasing decisions and honoring the local economy by supporting local businesses. There's all sorts of decisions, right, that happen through policy. So that's something we've been working on, is collecting policy examples from all over the country that reflect the values of that triple bottom line. Partnerships that you're seeking out, part of the program we've been developing. And what I'm doing here, really, I don't care if you join the program or not. And I want to be really clear on that. I don't make any money off of any of this. I'm a volunteer. But what's really cool is that we now have 72 libraries involved in the program, working on over 140 different activities, which means we're getting these huge buckets of examples of what you can do and what this looks like and how to connect better with people and to work on social cohesion in our communities, which is a huge, huge challenge in today's technologically savvy world. So, this is one example. Our second library to be certified was the Saratoga Springs Public Library, which might sound familiar to you because they're a pretty famous city in New York. But they used a community read to reflect their values. So you can see the titles they picked line up with the values of the triple bottom line, thinking about environmental stewardship and social justice issues. And interestingly enough, when they were a little more deliberate about the titles they picked, it drew new partners who wanted to be affiliated with that program. They actually saw more higher education and businesses and even municipalities who were like, we need to be a part of this because this is going to result in some very important conversations in our community. And it truly built new networks, new partnerships, and very important conversations about immigration, about people that are unhoused in that community, as well as the impacts of climate change on that community, really started to spark out of conversations that happened thanks to the Saratoga Reads program. So when you think about your dream program and the ultimate outcomes and effects it might have, this is a library that totally made it happen. It was fabulous to watch it. In my own system, we have something called the Library of Local. We're really focused on building the resiliency of our communities in the face of climate change in particular. So we have 17 locations out of our 66 that are designated as what we call the Library of Local spots. So these are hub libraries that have special collections of books on food security and climate solutions. They all have seed libraries. They all have tool lending libraries to help grow your own food. And they also align with something called the New York State Climate Smart Community program, which means municipalities that have made a commitment to work on climate adaptation and climate strategies. We've got these libraries specializing on these topics to support the work of the municipalities in these areas and to bring more people together to have these conversations and to problem solve through the platform of the library, whether it be your meeting space or your collections, or just finding like-minded people who want to work on this stuff. The libraries in these communities are becoming that meeting spot and that catalyst. And I just saw this morning, one of our library of local locations just launched a sustainability challenge for their community. So every month, there's a community challenge that raises people's awareness about little things they can do as individuals to feel empowered in the face of climate change and the work that needs to get done by all of us. So moving on with my other examples, I know I'm going to flash a lot in front of you. You can learn all about it on our website and learn these stories from our libraries through our website, no cost of entry. Here's examples of libraries that are thinking about programs and collections in some new ways that are connecting people with the outdoors, with where food comes from, with their neighbors. You can see on the left there, you've got the library farm at the Northern Onondaga Public Library north of Syracuse. This is a library that used some of their property for agriculture. So you can use your library card and borrow a plot of land and grow your own fruits and vegetables. So half the land is reserved for patrons to grow their own stuff. The other half is for community supported agriculture to do library programming around, hands-on programming, where folks grow food for the local pantries in the community that help serve folks that are struggling financially. Bottom, you've got the repair cafe movement. In the Hudson Valley here, we have the most repair cafes any place outside of the Netherlands where this program originated. But I think this program exemplifies the triple bottom line almost better than any other program we do, because it invites neighbors to teach neighbors how to fix stuff. So it's respecting local wisdom, it's connecting people socially, it's keeping stuff out of the waste stream, it's fighting for the right to repair your own stuff so you don't always have to buy new things. It's just an awesome program that builds community wisdom and connection, as well as doing some great stuff for the environment at the same time. And on the right there, you see the Butterfield Library's backpack program. They have a program using these backpack kits, and you might have these already too, bird watching kits, hiking kits. They even lend camping equipment now, but they want to help more families connect with the outdoors. We have a significant issue with nature deficit disorder in our society, where kids don't get outside as much as past generations did, and might not even understand how the natural world actually works. And so we definitely believe that the more people understand and respect the natural world, the more they'll fight to protect it and treat it well. Just like when you know people better and you have more empathy and respect for them, you treat them better. These are very simple constructs most of us learned in kindergarten. We're not talking about big, complicated ideas here. So just a couple of examples to bring that home. And then, of course, over the past 2 years, we've seen fabulous work in libraries across the idea of bringing new people together, celebrating the diversity of our cultures. This is just one of our 72 libraries that is doing work in the area of social cohesion, cultural respect days, celebrating things like Black History Month, Chinese History Month, making sure that people in that community see themselves reflected in their own library. And if you're not part of that culture, to have the opportunity to learn more about it. You could not ask for a more perfect place for that to happen than at the library, right? We educate folks through our collections as well as our programs. And so doing that deliberately based on our own demographics can go a long way to bridging gaps that are definitely in our community and helping people who normally never would have talked to each other have the opportunity to connect. So disaster preparedness, not as warm and fuzzy as some of the things we're talking about, but so absolutely necessary, not only for your own institution to be prepared in the face of natural disaster, but making sure our communities are resilient and understand what to do, not only to protect them and keep them safe, but also to help people come together in the aftermath of disasters to help support the emergency management community who puts their life on the line to help us in those moments. So just two libraries examples that I wanted to show you out of our 72 participants. Libraries that are focused on supporting the emergency management community and saying thank you to them all the time, not just when there's an emergency. You can see on the right there, one of our libraries does a picnic every year to say thank you to the emergency management community, particularly the volunteers. I don't know about you out there in Wisconsin, but in New York, here in upstate New York, a lot of our folks are volunteer firefighters, volunteer EMT, and they build their whole life around that service to our communities. On the left, you see the South Huntington Library, Janet Shearer, she's on our board, talking about helping community members get ready, helping kids not be freaked out about it, but empowered with knowledge about how to get ready in case there is a severe weather event, and how to make sure families are safe in the face of those things that we kind of know are coming at this point. But we want to help educate people so they're prepared. In New York, we have something called the Citizen Preparedness Corps. There's free training from the state that will come into all of our libraries and help people get ready to prepare in the face of what's coming. And I hope Wisconsin has something similar that you can benefit from. The real big one is decarbonizing, is reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And a lot of you may think you're not going to have the opportunity to influence this one at your library, but I just want to put it on your radar in case you do have the opportunity to maybe weigh in on getting a bookmobile or infrastructure upgrades like electric vehicle charging stations, or maybe you've got a renovation or construction project on the horizon you can help influence and prioritize using less fossil fuels to run your building and for transportation in your community. You can see here, I just want to celebrate the Crisney Library in Indiana, the very first library to be net zero. That means they produce all the energy they need from natural resources to run the library. Out in California, they've obviously got a lot more money being invested in some of these issues, but you can see there, the Santa Clara County Library, they went electric with their mini bookmobile. And out in Oklahoma, one of the very first libraries to have not only an electric vehicle charging station, but a solar powered electric vehicle charging station. And as we see the headlines about electric vehicles, we know the infrastructure needs a lot of help to catch up to the number of sales that are the goals for electric vehicles moving forward, which is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and slow the impact of climate change. Libraries are the perfect place to have these electric vehicle charging stations. And this is my last story for you before we stop for questions. Back in, 7 years ago, when we started the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, one of our colleagues asked, how do we know if we're successful? And that's a good question to ask anytime you're doing planning, right? When you're picking your goals, like, how do we know this worked? What does it look like if you're successful? And our co-founder, Matthew Ballerman, said, we're going to know when other people tell us that the library is a leader on the topic of sustainability. And I kind of looked at him sideways and I'm like, yeah, all right. Okay. I was thinking about benchmarking and metrics and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but gosh darn it, if he wasn't right. Because on Earth Day last year, there was a press conference held in the parking lot of the Lyndon Hurst Memorial Library, which was one of the first 5 libraries to be certified in our program. And the county executive of that county held a press conference to announce a $12 million investment in electric vehicle infrastructure, which they are going to partner with the libraries of the county on. And so the idea was they're going to put in EV charging stations and library patrons can use them during the day. And at night, the county vehicle fleet will be charged at these stations. And during his remarks, he said, we're standing here today thanks to the Lyndon Hurst Memorial's Library's leadership and early adoption of sustainable strategies. And I just sat back and I'm like, he was right. Like, this is what we're going for. We want to be seen as a viable partner. We want investment to come our way on this. And we want people to respect the work we do here. And so what a cool way. Lisa was the person that I spotlighted earlier about talking about being ready for the pandemic because of her work in this area. And then just last year, she had this happen in her parking lot. So it's good proof that attention to this, deliberate action in this area can make a difference. So, to wrap it up, I just want to say that we can lead by example. The choices we make at our library tell a story about who we are and what we value, but we've got to test for equity and make sure it's not just for one segment of our community, and it's got to be for everyone. So that whole EDI phrase of impact over intention, we always have good intentions, but are they having the desired result? And if they aren't, let's tweak it. Let's change it. Let's try something different. And of course, finding like-minded partners to go further than you could by yourself. You can't do it by yourself. Going back to the self-care thing, I don't care what you're working on, you need help, right? You need other people to support you and to do the work with you alongside of you. So if you're interested in learning more about this and taking a deeper dive, there was a briefing issued last year by the American Library Association's Council Committee on Sustainability. You can snap a pic of the QR code there. We'll send you the link as a follow-up in the presentation. Super short, really easy introduction to a lot of the things we talked about here today, along with examples for public, school, and academic libraries. I'll also encourage you to check out the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, sign up for our newsletter, get the app, come to our quarterly webinars, check out the final presentations of the libraries that were certified. Just in a maybe 20-minute visit to our website, you will get more ideas than you know what to do with, honestly. And if you want to step it up, you can join as a member and help support the work we do. And if you're interested in the methodology that I talked about, the Sustainable Library Certification Program, that's where you sign up for that or learn more about it. And that's where you get a guided mentor, access to an online dashboard that walks you through all the activities, and you can save your work and upload some of your examples of what you're doing to help the wider community working on some of this stuff. So Jamie, I'm going to wrap up here. I understand there's time for questions. We wanted to leave here, but before we get there, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's here, and to please reach out. I love learning about what other libraries are doing. I filled 3 books already for ALA editions with ideas of what we've seen from libraries around the country, and I'd love to include what's going on in Wisconsin too. So Jamie, thanks so much.
Wow, thank you, Rebecca, so much. Great information, a lot of great conversation happening in the chat too. I asked about some ideas where libraries would focus some of their funding if money wasn't an issue, and there were some great responses in there. If you do have a question for Rebecca, we do have some time, so feel free to post that in the chat or in the Q&A area. One question that came in is, what do you do if you're working with a board that isn't as generous and you can't get the mental health days that you need? You know, you focused a lot on that self-care, Rebecca. So any tips in that area?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with library boards. I actually authored our trustee handbook here in New York State, and I spend a lot of time consulting and training with them. And what I find is most of the time they are people just like us trying to make good decisions on behalf of the community. So as we think about what's motivating them and why they might be saying no when you're making a very reasonable request for PTO for staff, which is something that's necessary as a human, we might want to just take a look at why they might be saying no. Is it because they're worried about the financial impact, about the perception of the community? Is there data we can give them that would show them what the industry standards might be, or maybe the geographic standards might be, and that this board has fallen behind in giving attention to this issue? Is there research that might help make the case for it? So I always start from a position of trying to not assume the worst and give them a little more information to see if that sways things before I get pissed off at them. There comes a times when you sometimes just got to go there and be like, are you kidding? You're being unrealistic about this. But let's give them a chance to learn about the topic, just like we all have, and see if they can make a better decision with better information. I think, of course, if we can't get there, as you can see, we're seeing a movement of unionization across the country in library workers. And this is the kind of thing that boards have to be realistic about. If they're unreasonable in negotiating with library workers on a daily basis, what other choice do library workers have? So I'd start from a place of education, and again, not assuming the worst, but do a little legwork to make the case. And if you feel like you've already done that, are there champions on the board who might help you? Can you find allies to do that work before going to a very extreme approach to get it done?
Thank you. And this next question kind of piggybacks on that. So if my library wants to work better toward creating livable wages, and we aren't going to see any increases, where do we cut? Where do we make that room for that? Collections, programs, etc. Any tips on that?
So it's taken me a long time, but I really do believe a lot of library folks have a scarcity mentality, right? We immediately look at what we have today and we think, well, I guess we've got to cut, instead of making the case for more. And so I understand in Wisconsin, you don't always have direct line to influence your funding. Here in New York, we have direct voter support of our funding, where you might be making the case to municipalities who haven't bought into the idea of a living wage at this point. So I think, again, having strategies for increasing aid to your library at the same time that you're starting to rework the budget to reach that goal, there needs to be consensus over what the budgetary goals of the library are. And if we can come to consensus at that level for the administration and the governance of the organization, then we can start playing with the budget lines and saying, well, we've always spent money over here on the standing order for all these reference books. and no one's used them in a really long time, repurposing some money in your budget, but eventually you're going to hit a ceiling, right? You can only move those, few dollars around for so long until you realize there's just not enough there to do what needs to get done. And so then starts the advocacy work to make the case for increased aid to your library, centering those messages on what it means for the community. So it's, it doesn't usually work very effectively, right, when we're begging for money for the library workers, but if we're translating that into outcomes, that, well, we really need to have a quality youth services program here because of what's going on in our community, or we want our kids to succeed at school, and that requires staff that have these qualifications. In order to retain and attract staff with these qualifications, we need to take a look at the benefits package. So I'm not here to say that everything I'm saying is going to work in your situation. You all have very individual political environments that you operate in. I'm well aware of that, given my own 66 municipalities that I have to work with here in my system. But just a few little tips for you. I think at some point you might have to make the case for more, just like we did for the PTO answer. So being prepared of how we talk about that. It might not be as blunt as we talk about it here at the conference as it is when we're making the case to some decision makers.
Thank you. Sue wrote in the chat, I like that you said sometimes you're already doing some of this good stuff, but you're not promoting it. Sometimes I feel like after getting the good stuff going, I'm out of energy to promote it. Well, we do have a marketing track tomorrow, Sue, that might help with some of that. But Rebecca, any tips on that? And Heather followed up and said, I hear you, energy is finite. How do we decide where to put it when there's always more to do?
Yeah. So I hear you. Same problem here. Like Jamie was joking before the conference, like the marketing track is always the most popular, right? Because it's one of the things we struggle with the most is to get the word out about what we do. But the truth is we're working anyway to promote what we're doing. I think taking a look at the tone and the purpose of our messaging. I find that a lot of libraries spend a lot of time talking about what we do and not enough time talking about why we do it. We assume that people in our community understand that we care about education and our children and the work that matters to make our communities more livable. But they don't. They barely know the hours of the library, right? Like, how frustrated do you get when like someone you know really well is like, libraries are still a thing, and meanwhile you're doing this amazing work to build social cohesion and civic participation in your community, right? It's like banging your head against the wall. So first, switching your attitude of understanding that every moment's an opportunity to connect people with the good work that you do, and when you're planning a project, to build in that time for the marketing and PR of it. It's not just the end game of the result that we're having. If the tree falls in the forest and no one knows about it, have we made the impact we intended? We got to build in some time for that. We've got to invest perhaps a little more money in staff time to do that work, and not always treat it like, oh yeah, I'll get to that if I've got time. We got to be a little more deliberate about saying that is part of the work, is to connect people with what we're doing here, or we're maybe spinning our own wheels in the good work that we're doing here at the library. So I'm glad Jamie's got a whole track on marketing, because it is a whole profession, right, to learn how to get the word out about what we do. So I hope there's some great tips and tricks for you to make it more efficient and easier for you.
Yes, and there will be the sustainability track tomorrow as well, which we'll talk about trauma in some of the sessions. So I think that will be a nice balance. So Rebecca, the last question I have for you is, you talked about how you asked us all to hold it into our hearts, why we chose this profession, why we got into it. So I am guessing there's probably someone listening in right now who is saying to themselves, yes, I love what we do. I'm holding it in my heart, but that's no longer enough anymore. My life, my personal and professional life is a dumpster fire, and I'm tired of asking for money. I'm tired of patrons getting in my face. I'm tired of XYZ. What do you want to say to that person? Because I'm sure you've experienced it too.
I absolutely have. I'm not fronting. I have, right? I told you about my brownie problem. So I think that sometimes you just got to take a break, and that looks different for different people. Maybe it's, asking for a leave of absence, or maybe you need a job change, or maybe you need to step away from the profession and then come back in a little while, if that's right for you. But I do think it's important to take time to analyze yourself and understand what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way and what's causing that, because it might be the work. It really might be. Or sometimes, I know it's been the case for me, I've overextended myself. You can tell I do a lot of volunteer work, right? You can see it right here on my contact slide. I have a very big day job, but I also help run the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And oh, by the way, I write this column. And oh yeah, I volunteer for the American Library Association. And sometimes I am my own worst enemy. And I have to stop and hit the restart button and reprioritize what's most important to me. Time with my husband, my family, my friends, doing good at my job. What does it take to do good at my job is to make sure I have the health and wellness to do a good job and to let go of the stuff that's not helping me reach my goals. So, it's different for everyone depending on what your role is at a library or where you are in your career. And I definitely acknowledge that. But I would just say take some time to think, and maybe sometimes you need help. Sometimes you might have to tap into your employee assistance program or a professional to help you think some of this stuff through and help you organize your thinking. But I really do hope you prioritize your health physically and mentally as you think about the future.
I think that is a great way to end this session. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I can't think of a better message and a better person to kick off our conference this year. So there will be a short survey at the end of the webinar and also sent to your email. We do appreciate your feedback. Coming up at 10:30, we have 2 tracks today, one in management and one in reference and readers advisory. And if you haven't registered for any sessions today, you still can. That's the beauty of an online conference. You can register right up until the minute it starts or even while it's going on. So I hope we see some of you there. And if not, I hope you have a great rest of your day. So long.